when it comes to predicting U.S. presidential election results, few people can rival the track record of Alan Lichtman, a professor of history at American University in Washington. He developed the keys to the White House system, a checklist that weighs the chances of the incumbent or challenger taking the prize. He's correctly called 9 out of the last 10 elections since 1984. And Alan Lichtman joins us now. Alan, good to have you with us. You first predicted a Harris victory back on September 5th, and you've maintained that prediction. Why, when most people think it's too close to call?
Because my prediction system is unique. It rejects the pundits. They're buddies of mine, but they have no scientific basis for their prognostications. They have no track record of advanced prediction. And by the way, don't give any credence to anyone who claims they can predict elections without an extensive track record. My model has been essentially right, and I can argue it was even right in 2000, the one people think got wrong, because I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that Florida messed up, that Al Gore should have won Florida going away, but for the rejection of black ballots. But historians will be debating 2000 forever. But essentially, I've been right since I predicted Ronald Reagan's re-election in April 1982, and 60% of Americans thought he was too old to run again, and his approval ratings were historically low. That was the first of many times I made predictions against the polls, including in 2016, when I predicted a Donald Trump win, which did not make me very popular, in 90% plus Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University. Right. But
Alan,
what makes the keys? Yeah, go ahead.
Talk us through the checklist.
Yeah, the keys are different than anything else because they gauge the strength and performance of the White House party. In other words, the fundamentals, not the fluctuating polls or punditry. And here are the 13 keys. They're simple, integral parameters. Mandate based on U.S. House elections. Incumbency, contest for the incumbent party nomination. Third party. Short and long-term economy, policy change, social unrest, scandal, foreign/military failures and successes, and only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates, asking whether, and they're very high threshold keys, asking whether the incumbent or challenging party candidate are one of those once-in-a-generation, across-the-board, transformational, inspirational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat, or Ronald Reagan, the Republican.
Alan, what are the chances you could be wrong? You say don't pay attention to the campaigns of both candidates, but given how tight the race is, that 1% undecided will probably refer to the campaigns of the 2 candidates before deciding.
No one, I repeat, no one has a successful track record of predicting elections by looking at the campaigns. That's an illusion. Based on the campaign, Hillary Clinton should have won in a landslide in 2016. She won all the debates. She raised more money. She had more ads. She had a better organization, but she lost. You know, did John Kerry run a worse campaign than George W. Bush? He also won the debates against that very bad debater. Did Hubert Humphrey run a worse campaign than Richard Nixon in 1968? No way to tell. That's why I look at the fundamentals. And this idea that this race is undecided or close is based upon the misleading polls that led, virtually every pollster and pundit down the primrose path of error in 2016. The most eminent compiler of polls, the Princeton University Consortium, one of the great world universities, gave Hillary Clinton a 99% chance of winning. And I stood by my call of Trump. And by the way, I got a note after the election which said, congrats, good call, and in big Sharpie letters signed, Donald J. Trump.
Alan, your checklist does not include the possibility of influences from people like Elon Musk, for instance, the biggest donor for Trump, and he controls the social media, X at least, and he does wield a lot of influence. I mean, might your checklist perhaps be missing out on some of the other aspects which may be influential?
Well, my checklist is not just made up. As I said, I've been successful in predicting for over 40 years. No one else has a track record like that. And retrospectively, I developed the keys in 1981, looking at 1860 to 1980. And in 1860, we had no automobiles, no planes, no radio, no television, no polls. Women couldn't vote. African Americans were enslaved. Many demographic groups, like my ancestors from Eastern Europe, weren't here yet. We're an agricultural economy. So the keys have endured enormous changes in our society, in our economics, in our demography. in our politics. That's why I don't sway and change them in response to what people say, oh, this year is different. For example, in 2008, the critics said, you got to change your keys. America is not ready to elect an African American. Of course, if I listened, I would have been wrong. And in 2016, people said, oh my God, after the Access Hollywood tape with Trump bragging about sexually assaulting women, got to change your prediction. He's finished. I didn't. I stuck with it. And I am right. I was right then. You can't change a model based on 160 years of politics on the fly based on what critics say.
You talked about being worried when it comes to the fragility of democracy. Why? We're talking about a country that stands for democracy, possibly the biggest democracy, it says, in the world.
Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed. Throughout most of human history, we had no democracy. The first golden age of democracy was right after World War I, when we had about 24 democracies. That was cut more than in half by the 1940s. Then in the late 20th century, we had the second golden age. But throughout the 21st century, democracy has been drastically on the decline, mostly from within. And that's what I'm worried about this time. After all, we had Donald Trump in 2020 doing everything in his power to impede 200 years plus of the peaceful transfer of power and trying to steal an election by illegal means like fake electors and violent means like a coup on the Capitol that resulted in 140 police officers injured and several deaths directly or indirectly. He has made it clear he's going to try to do that again if he loses. He said he's going to use the military against his own people, who he said his enemies domestically are worse than the murderous Kim Jong-un, who machine guns his political opponents. He said he'd be a dictator on day one, to drill, drill, drill. Well, drilling doesn't take place overnight. It takes place over months and years. And no dictator in the history of the country who's been a dictator on day one has ever voluntarily relinquished power. So you can see, both historically and what's going on right now in America, something we've never seen before, I am perilously worried about the future of our democracy. Democracies die, unfortunately, from within.
Alan, I want to talk about your Twitter account. You tweeted recently about how Trump seems to be invoking violence. And I'm just going to read what was said, that to hit Trump, he says that the gunman must shoot through the fake news. What do you make of what Trump said?
It's absolutely chilling. And this comes on the heel of other invocation of violence, saying because he disagrees with Liz Cheney on foreign policy, she should be subject to a firing squad of 9 guns shooting at her face. We have never heard that kind of invocation of violence from a presidential candidate before. It's fair to criticize her, but not to invoke violence. Same thing here. He seems to be perfectly okay with murderous violence being directed against the press corps because he doesn't like the press corps the way they've covered him. Of course, he can criticize the press corps, but he can't invoke violence, and he has been doing that for years, and it's extremely chilling. And to an extent, I've been a recipient of that. I have never before, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, experienced the kind of hate that's been heaped on me this year. I have had hate heaped on me that is scurrilous, anti-Semitic, vulgar, violent, and directly threatening, including death threats. I have had the security of my family compromised. I have had to alert the police. I've had to take strong protective measures. Before the advent of Trump and his casual, constant evocation of violence and his dehumanizing of his political opponents, I've never seen anything like this. And remember, I predicted Trump in 2016. My predictions are totally nonpartisan. I predicted Reagan. I predicted the 2 most conservative presidents of our time, but now because I'm predicting Harris and, Trump and his allies don't like it,
right.
Look at the hate that's been heaped on me.
Alan, you're predicting a Harris victory. Does your model perhaps show any indication of how close that fight might be?
I wish I could tell you that. And it doesn't. I just predict winners and losers. So I can be proven wrong. That's why, having done this for over 40 years and being 77, I still have butterflies in my stomach, or I'd say this year, even crows in my stomach. But the pollsters, they just give you these meaningless probabilities. So Nate Silver says in 2016, depending on the time of day you check in, he has a 70 to 80% chance that Clinton's going to win. Then when she loses, he says, see, I told you she had a 20% plus chance of losing. Well, if you can't be wrong, you can't be right either. Then we've had some other wannabe pollster by the name of Thomas Miller, who model is based on these crazy prediction markets which are driven by the polls, and he's swung just in a very short period of time from predicting a Harris landslide to predicting a Trump landslide. And God knows where his prediction stands now that the prediction markets have moved away. The keys are the North Star of prediction. Unlike these poll-driven predictions or prediction market predictions, they stand firm and can be falsified. The others have no value whatsoever because they're all over the map.
Are you 100% sure, Alan? I mean, what's the risk you could be wrong? Remember, right after Biden's failed debate, you did insist that he should be still the candidate.
Yes, I was very critical of the Democrats for openly and viciously trashing their incumbent president right out in public. I've studied politics since the founding, and I've never seen anything like that. It was awful. I also thought they were headed for disaster by pushing out Biden and losing my incumbency key, but also having a party brawl and losing my party contest key. No White House party since 1900 has ever won re-election when losing both the keys. But maybe they listened to me, but at least the Democrats grew a spine and a brain and united behind Harris, avoiding the loss of that second key. I never said that if Biden had stayed in, Biden would have won. Who knows what might have happened? All kinds of things could have changed. I didn't issue my prediction until September 5th, deliberately in advance of the so-called pivotal Trump-Harris debate, to bring forth my big message that it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. But by that time, of course, Harris had been the candidate for some time and may have positively affected some of my keys, like the third party key, since voters didn't have to choose between two old white guys anymore. Hate to say that being an old white guy. Or the social unrest key, since the protests were directed against Biden, and he's now in the background.
You're a registered Democrat. If you're right and Harris does win this election, what would you like to see from her?
I would like to see a firm commitment to democracy. I think that is most important. I would like to see her reach out across the aisle. You know, our great presidents have been able to reach out across the aisle and get something done. I'd like her to take decisive action on climate change. Look, if we don't solve climate change, nothing else is much going to matter because this planet will become very dubiously livable. I would love to see her take strong action on reproductive rights. I'm a strong believer that women should control their own bodies and not have their reproductive decisions be dictated by politicians.
How about in terms of foreign policy? Would both candidates, Trump and Harris, take perhaps a tighter approach when it comes to China, for instance?
Well, I'm not an expert on China policy, and both parties seem to be pretty much anti-China. But there is a fundamental difference in the foreign policies of Trump and Harris. Trump is a believer in America first. He has trashed NATO. He doesn't believe in the collective security that's kept America safe since the end of World War II. He kowtows to dictators like Putin and Kim Jong-un. His great model for governing is the dictator Viktor Orban, who has also sidled up to Putin and snuffed out the opposition and the free press in his country, Hungary. I think Harris has a very different approach. She is a firm believer in collective security and a firm believer in standing up against Vladimir Putin's attempt not just to conquer Ukraine, but to reestablish the Soviet empire and threaten our NATO allies and in the end threaten American security.
Alan, thank you so much for your time today. Alan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University. He's putting all his money on the line, betting that Harris